Pac-12 expansion is on its way. It's just a matter of when.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lots of Big 12 talk because I upset some BYU fans, and well, one BYU fan is going to come on here and agree with me, but TCU is a waste, and they're like LSU of 2023. They're a waste of a good offense. And how good is Tennessee? How good is Tennessee exactly, and how bad is Auburn? That's all coming up on today's show. But let's start with the good old friend, the Pac-12, whose after dark mojo was alive and well on Pullman. Did you see the insanity that Washington State needed to go to 4-0? I can't believe they threw the football. I still can't believe they threw that ball. Anyway, Washington State won. Oregon State beat a Big Ten team. So the Pac-12, which is a two-team conference, is 7-1. They're going to add more schools. So this has been really well handled so far by Pac-12 Commissioner Teresa Gould, because you bring in 4 schools who you know you want to add from the Mountain West, and then you make them equity partners in your next decision, which is on its way. I don't know if it's today. I don't know if it's tomorrow. I don't know if it's this week, but there is a lot of buzz everywhere that you look. Every reporter worth their salt has had some source or some inside intel on something's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And that makes a lot of sense, because when you add those schools and you can bring them in and say, hey, we actually are in this together, rather than, we're just going to make all the decisions here and, add these schools, and then we're going to add, but we're not going to tell you what we're going to do because we're the only voting members here. I think that's a smart strategic move, because one question about the Pac-12 is, well, when Oregon State and Washington State leave at the first chance they get, yeah, do you want to help that perception? I think you should be conscious of it if you're Oregon State and Washington State, even if that is something you would do. And can't blame them. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. But for OSU and Wazoo, they bring in Colorado State, Boise State, Fresno, and San Diego State. And the rumors, the reports, the indications are that Memphis is the golden goose. That is the crown jewel. Because if you get Memphis, you can get Tulane and South Florida. And then the question would become, who's the fourth? But then there have been reports that there's a backup option if that doesn't work out. Now, I've said for a very long time, what the Pac-12 should do is go make the best Group of 5 conference in the country that ensures at some base level that your conference champion is going to get into the 12-team playoff in a 5-year stretch 3 or 4 times just by virtue of how strong your league is. Well, they're on a pretty darn good path to doing that. Washington State and Boise State play in a 25 and I think 26 match. It should be a top 25 matchup in Boise this weekend, but we'll just overlook that for now because I'm nice to the AP voters. I don't know why, but I am. They bring in Boise State. They bring in Fresno State. They bring in Colorado State, which has got some upside but hasn't been great, but makes some sense geographically. They bring in San Diego State. You go get Memphis, Tulane, and if you can get South Florida, oh boy, you're cooking with gas now, because you have blown by the Mountain West since you've taken their best football programs, and you'll have blown by the American. And your biggest competition for the G5 playoff berth as a conference champion every year is going to be the Sun Belt, probably, maybe an unbeaten Liberty in Conference USA, maybe an unbeaten American team if someone's left over. Here's where the question becomes. There are 2 questions. If you're able to get Memphis, and the reports have been, as I believe I mentioned earlier, that Memphis is the key because Tulane and USF aren't going to go unless Memphis goes. But if Memphis goes, Tulane and South Florida would jump. The question then becomes, do you sit at 9, which they could do, or do you add a 10th? Depends on who is interested, and also how interested Memphis and Tulane and South Florida would be, which hinges on the second point, what's the media valuation? And that's going to be the key pivotal question here that decides whether or not Memphis, Tulane, and South Florida wind up in the Pac-12 by 2026? Because I've seen some estimations that it could be $8 to $10 million. I've seen others that it could be $12 to $15 million. And Teresa Gold and her team at the Pac-12 should be, and I'm sure they are because they appear to have their heads screwed on over there at Pac-12 headquarters. They should be talking to television networks to get an understanding of, hey, what value does this school bring in? What value does that market bring in? Because if you can go back to Memphis and Tulane and South Florida and maybe a UTSA, for instance, and say, hey, we're going to be able to get a media deal that pays in the $12 to $15 million range, that's a jump. Because we have to remember is the extra travel costs. We're not just talking about football here. Football's not separate from the other sports, even though it should be. It's not. That's the world we're living in. Shield takes the world as it is, not as we would like it to be. If you understand that line, let me know in the YouTube comments. But if they're able to provide greater media value than what the American currently pays, then that will help offset the costs of traveling across the country. Because Pullman to South Florida, boy, I tell you, that's a long ways. That's a long trip. And football isn't the only one making that trip. Basketball's making that trip. Volleyball's making that trip. Soccer's making that trip. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. It's a couple $1 million to have these cross-country travel arrangements. So if you're the Pac-12, you have to be able to ensure your new prospective members that, hey, at the very least, this is going to be break even financially, which is all I think you have to do. Because I don't think Memphis and Tulane and anybody else are chasing big dollars here because they know they're going to be at a financial disadvantage compared to the rest of college football anyway. They're not in a power league. What they are seeking is, hey, we don't want to lose money on this endeavor. We're going to have to pay exit fees. Can you help us out with that? Can you get us more than we're getting under our current media rights deal? That'll help. But the reason they would make the jump is because they feel they'd have the best possible access to the college football playoff. Is they would go be in a league with the best of the Mountain West plus Oregon State and Washington State rather than compete with them for a playoff resume to try to catch to catch the, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but make the college football playoff committee like you. If you know what word I should have put in there and just didn't compute in my head, again, drop me a note in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter at @McLaughlinCFB. So there's plenty of buzz. There are plenty of rumors, speculation, discussions, articles, Dellinger, Canzano, and Auerbach, and like everybody's talking about this. Feels like there's something on the horizon. I'd keep a weather eye out, and we'll see if the plan that I have long discussed comes to fruition, and if so, I shall indeed take a victory lap. It'd be well deserved. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Let's go back to football because football is indeed fun. This is Locked On College Football, but all these things affect football, of course. TCU is a waste. They're a waste. They're a waste of Josh Huber. They're a waste of a great offense, and that's too bad. Is BYU for real? We're going to the Big 12 coming up next. First, let's talk about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, guess what? You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And guess what? If you want to bet college football, all these games that I talk about here on the show, if you want to bet them, you may do so. You know why? Because FanDuel's got everything that you could possibly want for college football. They've got spreads, they've got point totals, they've got money lines, they've got conference title odds, everything you want. It's all over there at FanDuel, and they've got the NFL too. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. $200 guaranteed bonus bets when you place your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com. That's the place to go. FanDuel.com, college football, NFL, whatever you want, FanDuel's got you covered. TCU is a waste. They're an absolute waste of a great offense. That's Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU Cougars, joining me here to discuss. We're going to get to that game because I want his thoughts on my thoughts, but I want to start with TCU here, Jake. This is just, this gives me 2023 LSU vibes. You've got a great quarterback. You've got a great offense. You're scoring 1 million points, and none of it matters for Sonny Dykes' team. I thought Andy Avalos was a good hire at defensive coordinator. I'm looking pretty wrong on that front because this defense is putrid.
Well, and that's the thing about this is I've watched BYU play SMU, and they shut down SMU with a good defense. Andy Avalos has a very good reputation among college coaches, but his last few stops, including this one at TCU, it's not been it. And yeah, you're right. They are wasting a very, very good offense. Josh Hoover, he's a very, very capable quarterback.
He's awesome.
They scored more than enough points to beat a team like SMU. Because as I said, I've seen BYU shut down that SMU squad. The fact that they allowed 66 points, that's an indictment on TCU and Andy Avalos.
And by the way, against an SMU team that is struggling to find its offensive identity. They've been back and forth with quarterbacks. Are they a tempo team? Are they a downfield passing team? I've watched SMU several times and thought, I don't know what they are. I don't know why Preston Stone isn't the guy. And all of a sudden it comes together against TCU a week after their defense blows a 28-7 lead and gives up a bunch of chunk plays to UCF and KJ Jefferson. I mean, the Knights are a good team, but if you lose one of those games, I can forgive you. College football is crazy. Losing both of those games, man, that's just that requires, if you're going to keep Avalos as the DC after this year, a complete fundamental overhaul of what you're doing on that side of the football and an overhaul in personnel.
Well, see, and the funny thing about this is, remember, TCU under Gary Patterson, what were they known most for? Their
defense. They were the only team in the Big 12 that ever played defense.
So it's incredible to see this have completely flipped to the other side of the football. Now, Sonny Dykes' reputation is, yes, it's offense, but you got to have a defense that can match that offense. And right now, it is absolutely not matching the level that they need.
I came into the season thinking TCU was one of the most underrated teams in the Big 12. They could be a dark horse for the Big 12 title hunt. I said that about Texas Tech as well. Red Raiders looking pretty solid through for the last couple of weeks. I won't say for every game because the Wazoo game, yikes, that wasn't particularly good. But I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in TCU. I'm not mad. I'm disappointed. Horned Frogs, I am incredibly disappointed. But I want to talk about this game that you got to react to, which was BYU Kansas State. So let's get to Kansas State in a moment and start with your BYU Cougars.
Yep.
My takeaway, Jake, and I'm shocked this didn't land well with the BYU fans, is that BYU is not a Big 12 title contender after this particular game. Every win that you have is not going to look anything like that. I know this because none of the other wins that BYU has had looked anything like that. That was a college football is crazy, awesome, fantastic, amazing, drunk as can be game on Dr. Pepper. And I just didn't look at that and think that's a repeatable formula week in and week out to go win the Big 12, as open as it is.
Okay, you mean to tell me you can't get a punt return that goes for like 170 whatever yards? Okay.
I don't think that's repeatable.
That's a joke, by the way. But no, you're right. The thing is, BYU took advantage of every opportunity given to them by Kansas State. They forced 3 turnovers. They cashed all 3 of them in for 21 points. They did exactly what you're supposed to do when given the opportunity to do that. But you make a very good point, Spencer, that 241 total yards offensively. No, that's not going to get it done every game. And that's one game in the Big 12. BYU knows about hot starts. Remember last year, they were 3-0 out of the gate. They were 4-1. They were 5-2. And oh, by the way, they finished 5-7. This is a team that knows they are just beginning an absolute gauntlet of a schedule. And if they get too high on themselves, they could easily go to Baylor this week, their next opponent, and get beat in Waco. They have to keep perspective in mind. And yes, if any BYU fan out there watching this, and I'll probably talk about it on my podcast as well, believes that BYU right now is a bona fide Big 12 contender, yeah, I'm not buying it quite yet.
No, I just don't see that, they've made the necessary improvements offensively to where I feel like they can go and put up 30 points every week. Now, Jay Hill, we were talking about a defensive coordinator hire not working out in Fort Worth. Jay Hill is going pretty darn well in Provo. I think that hire is being wildly well received, and it should be because defense has been carrying this team. I think Kalani Sitake has always had kind of that edge on that side of the football. And this BYU team, they look good defensively. They kept SMU in check. They forced turnovers against Kansas State. That's going to keep them in games. I just question whether the offense will match that production, because if you want to be a conference title contender, you can't be one-sided. I talked about this with Michigan and their Big Ten title aspirations for this season. I don't think you can just run the football and win a conference championship. You can be good.
Yeah.
You can just play great defense and you can be good. I'm not denying that. You look at Air Force in the Mountain West over the years. They haven't always had explosive offenses because they don't throw the ball. They only run it, but they play great defense and they can win a lot of football games. When you look at this BYU team, Jake, what do you think their ceiling is for this year?
I said it on my postcast edition of Locked On Cougars, and I'll talk about it throughout this week, is right now I set the expectations going into the season at 6 wins. Get back to a bowl game, I would consider that a successful year for BYU. Now that they're 4-0, I said 8-4. I look at that as a very manageable, I think, expectation at this point. 8-4 is not going to win the Big 12, as you mentioned. But here's the deal. BYU is going to continue to have to find answers offensively. Their running game, it's not operating at peak efficiency. They found a nice option in Sione Moa on Saturday night. He was very, very good in that game, but they still are not running like they need to run to have sustainable success. A lot of this offense is relying on Jake Retzloff not making mistakes. Well, his history suggests that there's going to be mistakes made when he's at the quarterback position. So, yes, they have to find a more manageable style of offense. Their third down percentage still absolutely abysmal. They've been pretty good about converting on fourth down when given those fourth and short opportunities and those go territory type moments, but they have to find a way to stay on the field offensively, grind out some drives. Early on against Kansas State, the Wildcats had a 12 and a 16-play drive that they cashed in for 6 points. So credit to the BYU defense for bending but don't break in that scenario. But the BYU offense only mustered 3 points until Kansas State absolutely imploded late in that first half.
You mentioned the gauntlet that BYU has to go through here. At Baylor this week, Baylor's not a great team, but they're certainly not a bad one.
No.
Hosting Arizona, and Baylor's going to be a little ticked off after what happened last week in Boulder. That was a fun game. Host Arizona, that's winnable. Oklahoma State, that's winnable. At UCF, winnable, but pretty tough. At Utah, host Kansas. At ASU, host Houston. I see one game on there where I say no question about it, BYU's going to win, and that's the Houston game. They're going to win some of those games, Jake, but you can only lose 2. You can lose 2 of those games the entire season if you're going to make the Big 12 championship game. I don't see that materializing for BYU.
And I'm with you on that. It's such a tough run here week in and week out. Now, there's a couple of bye weeks mixed in there, sure. But here's the deal. You have to travel across the country to UCF. Then you have to go and play Utah in Salt Lake City. You mentioned the back-to-back gauntlet of Arizona and Oklahoma State. Yeah, they're very good teams, but having them in back-to-back weeks, that's going to require a lot of effort for you to pull out those victories. And then you mentioned the Arizona State and Houston finish. Those look more manageable in terms of the finish there. But you're right. If you want to play for a Big 12 title, BYU has to manage all of that. I just don't see it happening.
On the flip side with Kansas State, I don't think their Big 12 title game aspirations are done. Now, you take a hit here because you need BYU probably lose 3 games since Kansas State likely to lose 1 more along the way. But they've got a chance for a bounce back at home this Saturday against Oklahoma State. Then it's Colorado, West Virginia, Kansas, Houston, ASU, Cincy, Iowa State. If you're trying to make your way to the Big 12 title game, Jake, that's about as manageable of a schedule as you're going to find. And sure, they've got to clean up the turnovers. They've got to clean up special teams. Everything that went wrong in this game. You can't have that happen again. But I'm not writing off Kansas State as a threat to make the Big 12 championship game.
Nor should you. Here's the deal. The big dogs in the conference, Utah, Kansas State, the favorites in the league got the more manageable conference schedules. They got more of the bottom dwellers, at least perceived going into the season, on their schedule. Kansas State can rebound from this, I think, very quickly because Avery Johnson, he got rattled in that game in Provo. He will learn from that. He'll be better. That was his first start against a Power 4 opponent on the road. That obviously is a learning experience, and he didn't pass against BYU. He will be better for that going forward, and he won't be as rattled, and the entire team, for that matter, won't be as rattled playing on the road going forward here. I absolutely think they can make a run at the Big 12 title, but they have to, as you mentioned, they've got to be able to make a run here because you can't afford to have 1 or 2 more losses and expect to be in Arlington.
Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU. Check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Jake, that was a good time, my man.
Absolutely. Anytime you need me, my man.
The Vols of Tennessee were shifted into the SEC. They look very good. Are they top of the SEC? Are they contenders, pretenders? That question's coming up next. First, let's talk about Game Time, which has a new feature. It's called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. You didn't think it could get easier? Guess what? It can. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time Picks, they curate things to make it easier for you to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you are looking for. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy your ticket so you know exactly what you're buying. They have their lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Plus, Game Time has got their Game Time ticket coverage, best in the industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. You know what Tennessee is? Tennessee is the new Bryson DeChambeau compared to the old Bryson DeChambeau. So for those who are not golfers, I'll briefly explain. When DeChambeau first became a big thing, he was all about the big drive, and that's kind of what he was. That's all you knew him for. He was a guy who was going to step up and hit the ball further than everybody else, and that was really fun to watch, and it was great, and he was a really good player. But do you know when he got better, started winning major championships? When he became a guy who the rules have to change so that he can be included on the Ryder Cup team? When the rest of his game followed suit. When his short game then allowed him to get up and down from, 30, 50 yards, I don't even remember, at the U.S. Open to the 18th from a bunker. That shot wasn't in Bryson's bag a couple of years ago. This is what I like about Tennessee. When they first arrived as, hey, Josh Heupel is a good coach. He's got them rolling in a way that they hadn't before. It was, we're going to go score a bunch of points, but also we're not going to stop anybody. And I had questions about their defense coming into the year. They look like they've answered them, at least from where I'm sitting, because Tennessee is no longer, hey, they're just about the offense. They're just about explosive passing plays. No, I can see them win the game through the air, though, Nico's got to clean up the turnovers a little bit. He's young. He's learning. That can change in a good way, of course. They can win with the explosive passing plays. They can win running the football. They win in the trenches. They can win with defense. They look like a well-rounded, complete football team. Would I pick them to beat Alabama or Georgia or Texas right now? No, because of the quarterback position. I like Nico. I think Nico's doing a lot of really good things. You still see the freshman mistakes. If you clean up the turnovers by the time Alabama comes to town, maybe I'll feel differently. But if that game were this week, whether in Knoxville or in Tuscaloosa, of course, Alabama's hosting Georgia this week, I'd still pick Alabama to win the football game. But Tennessee, for me, had two major questions coming into the year. What are you going to be on defense? And what are you getting out of Nico now that he's a full-time starter? Well, it's pretty clear. Nico can execute the offense at a high level, and man, when he makes a good throw, that long touchdown to Dante Thornton, that's zippy. That's a zippy throw. That was a beautiful thing to watch. But Tennessee has got more than one way to beat you. That's what I like about the Vols through the first few games. So if you give me, and those other teams in the SEC, they're well-rounded too. I watched Texas go into Ann Arbor and beat the brains out of Michigan. They ran the football. They didn't let Michigan run it. They won with defense. They had an explosive passing game. Texas had the whole arsenal. Alabama's got the most explosive passing game maybe in the country with Jalen Milroe and Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams and company. And I know that Kalen DeBoer is going to be able to win close games. I think Tennessee can win close games. They haven't had to play one yet, but that's to their credit. I think you'd hear people perhaps say that as a negative against the Vols, like, oh, well, they haven't had to play a close game yet. The Oklahoma game, I think everybody knows that game wasn't actually very close. The final score was them winning by 10, which is about what I had. I had them winning by 11, slightly more high scoring, but there was just some good defense being played that night. I'm okay with that. Every game doesn't need to be, TCU and UCF in the Big 12 where, everybody's putting up 40 to 50 points a game. Doesn't have to look that way. That's all right. I think for Tennessee, if Nico cleans up the turnovers, you got a chance against Alabama. I'm not into the Tennessee is going in and beating Georgia and that the Vols are ready to do that. Like, no, the Vols look good. They look complete. They look balanced. They look versatile. Heupel's been there a few years. He knows what his offensive system is. They know they want to run the football. They can ride the run game. They can ride Nico a little bit more. I don't think we've seen Nico have to take over the game because Tennessee really on both sides of the ball, dominated that game in the trenches, and the defense forced turnovers, and the defense was good situationally. Everything about Tennessee looks good. The next question, because the defensive question I think for me has been answered through the first 4 games, the next question is, does Nico take that next step to where he has a 350 to a 400 yard passing game because Tennessee can't run the football? Because it's not going to be as easy to run the ball on Alabama or Georgia, for instance. But those are the big games remaining on Tennessee's schedule. And then you look at the rest of it and you go, as long as they avoid an upset, kind of feels like they're good. So I'd put them 4th out of those 4 SEC teams that I just listed. I didn't put Ole Miss in there because I haven't seen Ole Miss play anybody yet. So I don't really know. Their schedule's not big. They played Wake Forest and they blew them out. Like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. That's great. But if you ask me to rank SEC teams 1 through 4 in some order, I would put Texas, Georgia, and Alabama, not necessarily in that order. And the 4th team would be either Tennessee or Ole Miss. I probably lean towards the Vols because they've had the opportunity to show me more. And I don't think Oklahoma's a great team, but I don't think they're a bad team. And I don't think NC State is a good team. I don't think they're a horrific. Okay. I'll back off on the NC State front because we'll see how the Wolfpack finished this year. It's not looking very good so far, but I'm impressed with the Vols. Here's who I'm not impressed with, and nobody should be, and nobody is: Auburn. Auburn. Oh my goodness. Look, I said I'm okay with a little bit of mucking it up, a little bit of sloppy play, a little bit of defense ruling the day. Auburn, Arkansas was a tough watch. I mean, just a brutally tough watch. Also, this is a brutal situation for Auburn to be in. They play their first 5 games at home. They play Oklahoma this week. I don't even know what to make of that game. I'm not even going to talk about it right now. Arkansas quarterback Talon Green finishes the game 12 of 27 for 150 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 picks. He leads the team in rushing with 80 yards, and Arkansas wins at Jordan-Hare by 10. By 10. Oh, yikes. Turnovers galore for the Auburn Tigers. If Hugh Freeze doesn't right, I don't know why that came out as Freeze. If Hugh Freeze doesn't right this ship by the end of the season and find a way to win at least 6, if not 7 football games, I don't think he gets fired at the end of the year. But going into year 3, it'll be the hottest of hot seats in the college football world. It will be one of the hottest seats. You know, like what Sam Pittman had coming into this year, but he's cooled it down because, well, they're 3-1 and their 1 loss. They should have won the football game in Stillwater against Oklahoma State. They put up over 600 yards of offense. So I don't think Arkansas is a great team. I think there's a horrible loss for Auburn. Season's not over because my expectation or goal for Auburn coming into the year was, hey, can you win 7-8 games? Well, you still can. You still have that opportunity. But I don't know which games you're going to win if you hold an opposing quarterback under 50% completion with 2 interceptions at your home stadium and you're losing by double digits. This is bad. This is trending in the wrong direction for the Auburn Tigers. I was talking about the Vols being a very complete SEC team. They have multiple ways they can win. Auburn's got no ways they can win. Now, I think Auburn's defense is actually pretty good, but their defense is asked to do so much because the offense is inept. They sat around and said, no, we're good with Peyton Thorne. We'll roll Hank Brown out there every now and then. We're good at quarterback. Well, you're clearly not. That was not the right move because I think Auburn's defense is good. I know they gave up the big play on 3rd and 19. I know it wasn't all perfect from the Tigers defensively. It rarely is, even for great defensive performances. Auburn's defense is not the problem. You've got a good defense. You have got good wide receivers and a great running back and nothing to show for it. That reflects poorly on the coach. That reflects poorly on the quarterback, who is, of course, coached by the head coach. And Bo Wallace didn't have nice things to say about Hugh Freeze. I wonder how those comments are going to, shall we say, age, because Bo Wallace is out there just ripping Hugh Freeze on Twitter, saying he's not a good guy, he's only out for himself and all this sort of stuff. It doesn't help. It doesn't help Hugh Freeze to have guys like that taking public shots because every little bit can add up. Nothing is going to, make or break Hugh Freeze's hiring or firing in one game or in one moment. But every little thing adds up. And Bo Wallace coming out and just saying, yeah, that guy's overrated. That guy's not any good. That guy never helped me or never did this, that, and the other thing. Not a great thing to see. But Auburn, good defense, great receiving core, good running backs. They're wasting it all. They are wasting it all, and it feels like this could spiral because the offense has absolutely nothing to show for it. I love college football. Gosh almighty. And we got a great week upcoming. Georgia, Alabama is college game day, understandably so. I'm not even going to be able to get to that tomorrow because we've still got more to discuss from week 4. So tune in then. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.